I'm not traveling as much as I used to. Much is due to the fact that it's getting a bit more difficult, not because there are no longer any appealing places with traction interest that I haven't yet visited. I joined the ERA in May of 1958, just short of my 21st birthday. Since then, this avocation has propelled me to many places, and I've enjoyed almost every minute of it. Tonight's program revolves around a trip to the United Kingdom that I took 6 months ago this past July with my traveling companion of late, Karl-Heinz Rober of Hattingen in Germany. And I believe he is on this Zoom call. So if he wants to unmute himself and interrupt me, it's okay, because he saw exactly what I saw. We had both wanted to see the latest developments in Britain, having read about transit improvements like the Elizabeth Line in London, a new branch added to the Blackpool Promenade Tramway, Britain's first and so far only tram-train line in Sheffield, extensions in the Birmingham area. Plus, there were tramway museums that would be new to us both, which we hadn't visited before because of time constraints. And serendipitously, my children and their spouses, both now also empty nesters, had the time and desire to spend overnights with my wife, Claire, for the period I was away. I'm reading now from a script because it's really the only way that I can remember everything I want to point out on a particular image. So pardon me if I get a little mixed up as I try to read and point with my cursor at the same time. Anyway, our trip looked at streetcar operations in only selected locations. Certainly there was not time enough to partake in an in-depth visit, or for that matter, not even sufficient time for an in-depth examination of the totality of tonight's subject matter in this Zoom presentation. And that's why I'm calling this program a travelogue. So let's get started. I had to get to Britain somehow from New York, and it turned out the fares to London were considerably cheaper from JFK Airport than from Newark. Both are simple to get to for me. In this case, it was a New Jersey Transit train to Penn Station from Montclair, the Long Island Railroad to Jamaica, and then the air train to the plane. My connections were virtually seamless, although I had to buy separate tickets. JFK's air train is 8.1 miles long and has two lines. The one I took runs from Jamaica Station, where it connects to the Long Island Railroad and various New York subway lines, while the other meets 8 trains at Howard Beach, also in Queens. The totally automated system, giving great views out the front, rear, and even the sides, loops through the airport in a counterclockwise direction and also has an in-airport clockwise loop. This is a view of the outer loop, a clockwise train about to enter the station for Terminal 4. The driverless rolling stock consists of 32 Innovia cars built by UTDC of Canada, now Alstom via Bombardier, for air trains opening in 2003. This type of car is also used on non-airport lines in Vancouver and Detroit. This view is also just west of the Terminal 4 station used by Delta, the carrier that I used to London Heathrow. I've organized these photos geographically from north to south in Scotland and England, as it's actually more coherent than our itinerary was, which was driven by museum operational dates and the desire to be in certain locations to observe weekday service. Thus, we were in London at both the beginning and end of the trip, but I'll show London just once at the end of the program. And we made day trips while staying in Newcastle upon Tyne and Birmingham. Great Britain, one of the 2 islands of the British Isles, consists of England, Scotland, and Wales, and is relatively small encompassing some 80,000 square miles, which means it's smaller than 11 of our states, for example, Michigan. It has a population of about 66 million as compared to our country with 335 million and Canada with only 40 million. But unlike our two, travelers between most large cities can accomplish their journeys within daylight hours, many just taking up a morning or afternoon. Passenger rail service in most cases is fast and comfortable, and one doesn't waste much time when traveling between two places, either on a point-to-point itinerary nor when making day trips. And they do say that getting there is half the fun, which clearly does not apply to flying in coach, but can be true, especially for us rail enthusiasts traveling by train. Like the US and Canada, most legacy streetcar lines in Britain were replaced by buses before the 1970s, all except Blackpool and the Isle of Man. And I'll point to those. This is the Isle of Man. I hope you can see my cursor turning around, and Blackpool is over here. And also, like us, the Brits realized their mistakes and acted to build new light rail systems, many in the same cities that previously had streetcars. By the way, Britain, and France for that matter, use the word trams for both what we call streetcars and light rail, and so I will use those words interchangeably. Looking at the map, our first and longest trip was from London's King's Cross to Newcastle, roughly 250 miles. Here is London, and way up here is Newcastle. It took about 3¼ hours, and we visited the tramway museum in Beamish as well as the rapid transit line there. But I will start with Edinburgh, which is up here. A day trip of a little over 100 miles and 90 minutes from Newcastle by train. We will also look at Sheffield, Manchester, and Blackpool. And here is Manchester, up here is Blackpool. And we're going to skip Nottingham because there's really not too much new there, and spend some time in Birmingham. So here we are in Edinburgh. Our train from Newcastle was operated by TransPennine Express, one of Britain's open access regional carriers. It's an 802 class AT300 EMU built by Hitachi Rail, successor to Ansaldo Breda. You've probably heard the expression, mind the gap. And now from this view at Edinburgh's main station, Waverley, you can see why it is used so often. Edinburgh is the capital of Scotland, but its population of 514,000 means it is not the country's largest city, as that honor goes to Glasgow with 620K. But the two competitive cities together still represent a little over 20% of Scotland's inhabitants. Edinburgh, however, is a crowded tourist venue, especially in the summer, with its festivals and major historical landmarks. It is dominated from a rocky escarpment adjacent to the city center by Edinburgh Castle, which is accessible via a historical route called the Royal Mile, which starts at Holyrood Palace, the northern home of the British royals. The weather on our day here was particularly gloomy, although it did not rain. As a result, I will intersperse some views from a 2018 trip where the weather was perfect. Here is a photo of the Citadel from Princess Street, Edinburgh's principal thoroughfare, with one of the many statues in the park at the foot of the embankment. A view looking north from the top escarpment, which shows one of Edinburgh's LRVs running on Princess Street and the northern landscape of the city running to the Firth of Forth. No, it was not named by someone with a speech defect or a Castilian visiting from Spain, but rather is a fjord in the North Sea. into which a series of rivers flow and is responsible for making Edinburgh the busy harbor that originally led to much of its prosperity. The harbor area in the background is called Leith, and the recent extension of the tramway to Leith was the reason for this visit.
Unknown caller.
You may have heard of the famous Firth of Forth Railroad Bridge. The huge and attractive structure was completed in 1890. It's 8,094 feet, slightly more than 1.5 miles long, and when it opened, it contained the longest single cantilever bridge span in the world, now only surpassed by the rail bridge connecting Quebec City and Lévis over the St. Lawrence River in Canada. The Edinburgh Tramway was opened in 2014 from the airport to the city center. And here is the airport, and it's running through the suburbs here and gets to join the city a little short of Haymarket. A lot of open private right-of-way on the part that I just talked about. The 8.4-mile line at that time then continues along Princess Street from just before Haymarket Station to sort of 125th Street for Waverley. In addition to serving these two stations, it also intersects two ScotRail lines in the suburbs at Edinburgh Gateway over here and the other at Edinburgh Park. This allows riders from other parts of Scotland to reach the airport by transferring to the light rail line without detouring through the city. In June 2023, just 7 months ago, it was extended for 3.1 miles, mainly via street trackage to Leith and Newhaven. Here's where it ended. And that was York Place, but that station has been replaced by Picardy Place and runs basically via streets all the way out to Newhaven. It takes about 55 minutes to traverse the entire 11.5-mile line, with the original and the extensions roughly consuming the same amount of time. A telephoto view from the terminal of the Newhaven extension of the line. The tram on the right will finish its run here. There is a crossover prior to the platforms, while the one at left has just departed on its journey to the airport. Note that we are in the British Isles, where traffic runs left-handed. The tall cranes in the left background bear witness to the redevelopment of Leith into a residential and entertainment area as its industry declined. A huge parking structure in front of them serves Edinburgh's Ocean Terminal, home to the Royal Yacht Britannia, a now tourist attraction, which was decommissioned in 1997 during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, and the city's largest shopping center, containing shops, pubs, and restaurants galore. The buildings stretching out on the right side of the photo are new residential apartments and condominiums. The Newhaven terminal has side platforms, and I think we missed that slide. If possibly indicating a future extension of the line. If that were to happen, it could follow an original plan and loop back from Newhaven over to Haymarket, making sort of a circle. That concept has been replaced by a plan with a new tram line running just north-south from Granton, well east of Newhaven. So there would not be a connecting track from here to Granton over here, but just a line going north-south into the center of Edinburgh. The five-star Fingal Hotel is prominent in this view. Built in Glasgow and registered in Leith, the Fingal was constructed in 1963 to ferry lighthouse keepers along the shores of the west coast and north of Scotland. It languished after its retirement in 2000 until purchased by the Royal Yacht Britannia Trust in 2014. It took 5 years to rebuild the craft into its current role as a floating hotel. This and the previous photo were taken at slightly different angles, only a few yards apart, looking toward New Haven, between the Port of Leith and Ocean Terminal stops along Ocean Drive. The road takes the line past and over former busy waterways, like the Albert Dock Basin, where the Fingal lies, and one called the Water of Leith, which the now pedestrianized Victoria Swing Bridge at left crosses. Looking toward the city center from the foot of the walk stop at the entrance to Leith. Leith Walk becomes Constitution Street at this point. And I should at this time mention the tram's rolling stock. 27 of these 7-section articulated LRVs were built for the opening of the line's first portion in 2014 by CAF. The double-ended 100% low-floor Urbos 3s are 140 feet long, seat 78 passengers, and are capable of speeds up to 43 miles an hour. Quite popular overseas, they are also used in Cincinnati and Kansas City, and we'll see them twice more in this presentation. Turning 180 degrees around, the beginning of narrow Constitution Street was converted into a pedestrian and tram-only area for just a short distance. Beyond the curve, it's straight ahead to Leith, with plenty of room for both autos and trams. Note the simple stop where passengers board and alight from trams, the countdown clock in the background, and especially that some LRVs are fully wrapped in more than just a version of the official livery. At this point, we concluded our coverage of the extension, but still had plenty of time, so we revisited the original section of line, riding all the way to Ingleston Park and Ride, one stop before the airport. Why did we stop there? Mainly because traveling beyond there involves paying a heavy extra fare. Like so many cities worldwide that try to suck as much money out of airline passengers, so does Edinburgh. I haven't mentioned fare yet, so I'll explain some of it now. Except for the airport zone, the fares are the same as Lothian buses, the city's other transit system, which offers one-way, day return, and day tickets, which cost £2, £3.80, and £5 respectively. But the airport supplement adds a hefty additional £5.50 to a one-way journey and an additional £7 for a day ticket. This explains why I noticed on my 2 other trips to this city that after I arrived at the airport, I found many people walking on paths along the tram line, rolling their luggage to Ingleston. Proof of payment is used, and a valid fare must be displayed on request by inspectors, or the passenger must pay the, quote, on-board fare of £10. Tickets are available from machines which are located at every stop. They have adult, child, and family fares, but no senior ones. We found that an inspector was on board just about every tram we rode, and we were checked often. So different from select bus service and New Jersey Transit's light rail lines. This is a view of an inbound train from the airport about to make the sweeping curve into the Ingleston stop. Note the fact that Edinburgh was suffering a drought this past summer. But also note that there were areas where the grass was watered by sprinklers. This is the curve leaving Ingleston with a fully wrapped tram, airport bound. Another such location is between the Giles Centre and Edinburgh Park stops. Oh, and there's my photo of the New Haven terminal with the platforms on both sides. How did that get out of order? Two from the Bankhead stop. Here's a rear view of a New Haven-bound tram climbing to one of the road overpasses in the area where the tram line and railroad parallel each other. Finally, this wrapped tram running toward the airport has just negotiated the overpass and heads into Bankhead. But not finally. A reprise at the same location from 2018 proves the sun does shine in Scotland, at least occasionally. Another view in Edinburgh's Greenbelt. This is typical of the usually verdant appearance of the line east of the city. The railroad is behind the bushes. There is a mixture of grade separations and level road crossings, with the latter protected by traffic signals or stop signs. A ScotRail 170 series DMU approaches the Edinburgh Park station in this view from the outbound platform. The AdTrans Bombardier unit from the turn of this century has just crossed under the tram line. I was disappointed it was not a meet, so I had to make do with a separate photo of the two electrified lines crossing, one at 25 kV AC and the other at 750 volts DC. I should mention that the trams were running on a 7-minute frequency and were very well patronized. Now we turn to Newcastle upon Tyne in the northeast section of England. Like Edinburgh, our visit to the Beamish Open Air Museum was also a day trip. While we could have reached our destination, which lies some 8.5 miles south of the city center, directly by transit bus, we opted to go by a combination of rail and bus, which was faster. Anyway, our Route 28 bus on the final leg detoured off the main road into the museum's driveway and parking lot at about 10:30 a.m., and quite a few passengers got off. The whole trip took about 1 3/4 hours, including a 10-minute walk between our travel modes, luckily mostly downhill, and a 10-minute wait in the village of Chesterless Street for the 28 bus. Called the Living Museum of the North, Beamish is home to a 1.5-mile long tram loop served by a fleet of 5 currently available heritage trams. With an opening time of 10 a.m., the park was already busy upon our arrival. This, of course, was what we were looking for. Ex-Blackpool double-decker 31 and former Porto streetcar 196 in South Shields colors are passing each other at the visitor's entrance stop. The single-track loop has 4 stops and 4 passing sidings. The Brits call them passing loops. 2 cars were running clockwise, but only one was running counterclockwise, which meant an approximate 10-minute headway in one direction, but 20 in the other. We'll first visit the Fowlbridge Car House, the first stop in the clockwise direction, and take a look at what we could see of the roster. But before we get there, I'd like to reluctantly mention rubber-tired urban transport. The museum has a fleet of heritage buses, of which 1 or 2 were operating, and it even has a short trolley bus line. Notice the wire above the inner loop track at this point. But of special interest is Beamish's Venture bus. This is the museum's transportation for the handicapped to carry such visitors to the sites on the property. They don't say it's a replica, as the 2007 built coach that contains an electric chairlift is only based on vehicles that were built right after the First World War for what was then one of the largest bus operators in Britain's Northeast, Venture Transport of Consett. But the livery and crest are authentic. Speaking of authenticity, the museum, which opened in 1972, aims to portray everyday life in Northeast England during the late Victorian and Edwardian eras and into the beginning of the 20th century, with an emphasis on the effects of the industrialization that occurred during that period. An educated guess would be that most visitors are more interested in observing these aspects of local culture than the trams. I would say that the tramway reflects the period just before the Great War. thereby serving a dual purpose to provide transportation around the site and to recreate the experience of riding streetcars around 1913. And as such, all the cars are equipped with trolley poles. As a compromise in terms of operational efficiency, instead of wheels, the poles are fitted with carbon shoes. The tramway commenced shortly after the museum opened, but the present loop was not completed until 1993. Number 114 is one of 20 single-truck open-top trams built in 1901 by Hurst, Nelson and Company in Motherwell for the Newcastle Tramway. Its upper deck was eventually enclosed, and in 1941, the four-wheeler was sold with many others to Sheffield to replace cars that were damaged from German bombing. Don't forget, Britain entered World War II 2 years before Pearl Harbor. It was withdrawn from service in the early 1950s, and its body was eventually discovered on a farm near Scunthorpe. It was acquired by Beamish in 1987 and entered service in 1996. Here's former Sunderland number 16. The double-deck car was built by Dick Carr and Company in Preston in 1900 with an open top and was not enclosed until after World War I. After Sunderland's trams were abandoned in 1954, the lower deck was used as a changing room for football players, then a tool shed, and finally an Apple store. I believe the fruit, not the phone, until it was rescued by Beamish in 1989. The upper deck of the sole surviving Sunderland tram was rebuilt from scratch with the car entering service in 2003. The depot itself has 4 tracks, one with a pit, and is the location of the line's electric substation, where a silicon transformer rectifier set converts the current to 550 volts DC. Lisbon four-wheeler 730 is Beamish's latest acquisition and rests just outside the Fowlbridge complex. It arrived here from its previous home at the Merseyside Tramway Preservation Society in Birkenhead, where it was regauged from its narrow 900 millimeter spacing. The Brill-type semi-convertible was built in the Lisbon's Caras shops and entered service in 1938. It was imported to Great Britain in the 1990s and moved to Birkenhead by ERA member Alan Pierce in 2004. Now off to the next stop, the town. Built to resemble a British village just prior to the Great War, it has shops, a pub, and other accoutrements of the era, including a staged protest on both sides of the tram, both for and against women's suffrage. But here's a close-up of car 196. It's actually the second car from Portugal, this time from the standard gauge Porto Tramway. The four-wheeler was built in 1935 by their Caras at its Boa Vista shop. It arrived in Beamish in 1989, where it was extensively remodeled and placed into service in 1992. It is painted in the blue and yellow livery of the tramway that operated until 1946 in South Shields, a suburb of Newcastle located at the mouth of the River Tyne. The shield of the South Shields system is displayed on the tram sides. Four-wheelers of this type operate in many locations in the U.S., including Yakima, Memphis, temporarily not, Dallas McKinney Avenue, and at the Rock Hill Trolley Museum in Orbisonia, Pennsylvania. Behind the 196 was car 31, probably the most popular tram at Beamish because of its open top, especially on warm days like this one. It is shown in front of the town's tramway and omnibus waiting room. Blackpool 31 was originally built as a four-wheeler in 1901 by the Midland Railway Carriage and Wagon Company. In 1918, it was rebuilt into what turned out to be a prototype for the company's long-running standard trams. Its body was lengthened to the two small windows at each end. The rebuilt body was then placed on two bogies, which is what the Brits call trucks. Fortunately for us, in 1934, it became a line inspection work car for the next 50 years before being sent here, where it was restored to its 1920 condition. Here is a close-up of Blackpool's coat of arms, lovingly restored. The final car in the operable roster is double-deck, so-called balcony car number 264, built for Sheffield in 1907 by the United Electric Car Company of Preston. The single trucker was later modernized and thus lasted in revenue service as car 342 until 1956, just 4 years before Sheffield's legacy system was abandoned. The city, which will be included in this program, was without streetcars for 34 years, as its Supertram was finally inaugurated in 1994. Number 342 was displayed at a forerunner, excuse me, of the London Transport Museum in Clapham until 1967, when it began its restoration journey, eventually turning into number 264 again and becoming Beamish's all-weather tram. A more recent overhaul was completed 8 years ago. It's shown at the edge of town. Our weather was constantly changing during the day, and we were patient enough to get the sun at most locations, but an exception was on a curve along the single track just beyond the town. Here is Porto number 196. Pockerley is the newest development at Beamish, a recreation of an 1820s era village. The tram halt and tracks are out of view of the village. Blackpool 31 paused here to let passengers off, and we boarded for our last ride back to the entrance and exit of the museum. So farewell to Beamish and our last view of Sheffield 264 and Porto 196. From here, we headed back to Newcastle via bus route 28, with stops just short of the Tyne River at Gateshead Interchange, a large transfer complex serving Newcastle's bus system and the Tyne and Wear Metro. Gateshead is a separate town from Newcastle, actually a borough in Tyne and Wear County. And Gateshill is over here, if you can see my cursor. And here is South Shields, where the tram came from. South Shields is a town in the same county. With the clock reading only 4 p.m., we had time to explore Tyneside's metro and even take photos, as summer afternoons are very long in the far north. When the system first opened between 1980 and 1984, it was hard to classify in terms of industry vernacular, as its historical roots were in an early electrified 600-volt DC suburban third rail system that was losing passengers and whose infrastructure and rolling stock were wearing out. The paradigm for passenger railways in Britain in the 1960s was cut, cut, cut under the guise of rationalization, and it was accomplished brutally by Chairman of the Board, Richard Beeching. As for Newcastle, the third rail on the routes electrified in 1904 and 1938, respectively, the so-called Tyneside Electric Network was ripped up in 1967 and 1963, and the commuter service dieselized with significantly longer running times. In the 1970s, local civic leaders and politicians realized the decline of the region's economy was partly due to poor transit, and noting the success of new rapid transit systems like PATCO and BART in the United States, brought forth a plan for the Tyne and Wear Metro, based on the by then underused rail routes, with the addition of judiciously placed new bridges and tunnels to better serve the city itself. The new publicly owned system in operation in 1984 was 36 miles long. now 48 miles because of later extensions, and electrified with 1500-volt DC overhead. And a lot of the new construction was in this grayed out area over here, which is the equivalent of uh, the downtown section of Newcastle. The Queen Elizabeth II Bridge is part of the new infrastructure. This view from a train shows some of the other bridges crossing the Tyne. And here is one of the Spartan platforms at the underground station at Central. Note the annunciator, or countdown clock. Headways are good with an average of every 10 minutes on each service. Especially note the destination of St. James. It is also in downtown Newcastle. Actually in walking distance, a half mile from Central. But that train from Central, which is over here, heading for St. James, takes a rather long route. As you can see, it's much easier to either walk or change right over here at Monument. I visited Newcastle in the 1980s, and for a long time afterward wasn't that interested in going back, as little had changed. But then I read about new cars to replace the original rolling stock being delivered and under test. Perhaps we'd be lucky and could see some, and could bid our farewell to the original fleet, which is now 40 years old. 90 Class 994 articulated high-floor subway cars were built for the system by Metro Camel, based on the Duvag Stadtbahn B design for tram systems in places like Cologne and the Ruhr. In the 1980s, we probably would have called the new system a Stadtbahn, as the word tramway would hardly fit, as there is no street running or reserved track parallel with auto traffic. But there are some grade crossings. So nowadays, with the introduction of the term light rail, we have a name for it, light metro. Some have likened the Tyne and Wear metro to a tram-train operation, as a section of the Green Line from Paloa to Sunderland and South Hilton, opened in 2002, shares track with the freight and passenger trains of Network Rail's Durham coastline. But there is nothing tram-like about this operation. Newcastle's original Class 994 rolling stock is identified as Class 599 for Network Rail's TOPS computer system when operating over the shared track. I took this photo of the rear of an airport-bound Green Line train just west of the Fordon station. This photo of the rear of an Orange Line train heading for St. James via Whitley Bay and North Shields was taken from the outbound wheelchair ramp at the West Jesmond station of the combined Green and Orange Lines. A view from the end of the outbound platform at the same station is an old-fashioned type selfie via the motorman's mirror that also shows Karl Heinz, a stopped inbound train, and a departing outbound train. Same time, same place, from the top of the ramp, with the sun making an appearance as an inbound train approaches the station. We saw our first new train from a window of our car while passing the South Gosford Depot on a Green Line train. At that time, our cameras were not ready, but that didn't happen on the return trip. While talking to the motorman while we waited for our train to head back from its airport terminal, he showed us his cab, but more importantly, told us that one of the new trains was on the road right now being tested between South Gosford and Pelaw. Luckily, we were aboard a South Hilton bound train, as when we alighted at South Gosford Station and were in the process of crossing over to the outbound side, this arrived on the inbound track, and it stayed near the end of the platform for a sufficient amount of time to allow us to snap a few images. What serendipity! This train is a single, air-conditioned 5-car unit with open gangways and a combination of soft longitudinal and transverse seating. 46 of these Class 555 trains are being built by Stadler in its Erlen, Switzerland plant and will replace the entire fleet of original cars. A view of the new train also showing the station's pedestrian overpass. Note the color scheme, as it is almost a reversion to the original livery of the old cars. This image at Tynemouth Station is from the internet. This original Northeast Railway station was restored in 2011 and 2012, 130 years after it was built. It's an excellent example of Victorian railway architecture with its distinctive curved glass glazed canopies over 4,600 panes. The restored wooden footbridge is a bit newer, probably only about 100 years old. One final view of the Tyne and Wear Metro at the junction of the two lines at Pellaw of a train from South Hilton about to enter the station. Our next overnight stay would be in Blackpool, but before arriving in that Irish Sea coastal resort, we would spend the bulk of the travel day in Sheffield, with our main plan being to observe and ride that city's new tram-train operation. I've been to Sheffield 3 times since the opening of the Supertram in 1994. Thus, this section of the program will be intermixed with scanned photos from my previous visit in 2017, prior to the tram-train's inauguration. We departed Newcastle with our carry-ons on the 8:35 cross-country DMU and arrived in time in the Steel City at 10:20. The Pittsburgh of Britain. We thought it would be easy to stow our bags at or near the station, but with a total lack of interest by station information and tourist office personnel, we had to depend on leads from the public and the internet, which led us to walk to the city center, where we finally obtained some useful information that took us to a 24-hour convenience store almost across the street from the cathedral, completing an uncertain hour's walk instead of a direct 5-minute 3-stop tram ride. Sheffield's Anglican Cathedral, Church of England, officially known as the Cathedral Church of St. Peter and St. Paul, dates from Norman times, and its motto is, "God has been worshipped on the site of Sheffield Cathedral for over 1,000 years and counting." The cruciform-shaped structure dates from the 15th century. Cathedral Square is also a major stop on Sheffield's Supertram system. This city in the Midlands is an easy day trip from London, with trains taking about 2 hours for the 160-mile journey from St. Pancras Station. Sheffield, now with a population of about 500,000, was once the center of Britain's steel-making industry. Mention of its fine cutlery even goes back to Chaucer. As just mentioned, the South Yorkshire Supertram opened in 1994, a very successful network covering 18 miles and serving 50 stations. It carried from 10 to 15 million passengers per year pre-COVID over its 3-routed, 6-branch, color-coded network. The 2 main routes, the blue and the yellow, run every 12 minutes during daytime hours on weekdays and Saturdays, with the tram-train running every half hour, 7 days a week. The tram-train goes out in this direction, running with the yellow line over here. And the yellow line ends there. The blue line runs down here and then out all the way to here. Back at Cathedral Square, where the tram-train and purple line terminate and change ends, and the blue and yellow line run through, we see a yellow line car about to come to a halt. 25 Siemens Duvag 40% low-floor cars were built for the system, and we boarded one of them after disposing of our luggage. The cars are operated by a crew of 2. Sidewalk ticket machines have all been torn out, and fares can now only be paid through a mobile app or bought from a conductor aboard each car. We chose the latter to acquire our day tickets. Just 2 stops east of Cathedral Square is the tramway's Park Square Bridge, which was constructed in 1993 using a design called bowstring or tied arch. It connects the lower end of Sheffield's business district with all of the lines to the higher ground east of town. The structure carries pedestrian and trams over a major traffic circle and was necessary because of the city's unusual topography, as its downtown portion is in a bowl surrounded by hillsides. While there is a track connection, all trams coming from both north and south turn eastward onto this bridge to downtown. Heading out toward the Yellow Line's connection with the new tram-train, here are Supertram cars 106 and 121 passing just east of the Valley Centertainment Station. At right, the National Railway System freight tracks, also called Network Rail, were originally built by the Great Central Railway. This stop serves a leisure park that contains family entertainment venues, including movie theaters, miniature golf, bowling, an amusement park, and lots of food vending. The same Siemens equipment on the same line. This is a prelude to the next photo at the same location, but of a Voslo Stadler car. Sheffield's tram-train to Rotherham, an extension of about 4 miles on Network Rail track, opened in October 2018. It employs 7 Voslo Stadler-built CityLink articulated trams running from just past the South Meadowhall Tinsley stop of the Yellow Line to the main station in Sheffield's adjacent town of Rotherham, sharing the rails with freight and passenger trains of the National Railway System. The line then continues for a short distance to the Parkgate Shopping Centre, where it terminates on a short spur at the side of the railway. The extension started out as a British government demonstration project after the success of the Karlsruhe model in Germany and later in France, Hungary, and now in Denmark. A major reason for developing the tram trade mode is to allow passengers from suburban stations to be distributed through their respective city centers without having to transfer and change vehicles. This generally involves building dual voltage or dual mode LRVs that can operate seamlessly over mainline and branch line railroads, including running at higher speeds and compliance with more than one signal system. Usually the vehicles are not totally 100% low floor, as can be seen in this interior photo. In British Railway's top system, the LRVs are classified as 399. This view shows an outbound 399 CityLink car accelerating from the low-level tram platform of Rotherham Central Station to go past the high-level one used by National Rail trains. Note the ramp connecting the 2 elevations on the right side inbound platform. This image was taken just a few moments later and shows the passengers who had left the tram train walking to the high-level platform to board this connecting Northern Trains operated DMU train, which is slowing down for its Rotherham Central stop. Now the diesel MU that came from Sheffield's main railway station has stopped. Here is a freight locomotive coming through on the multiple use track. On the inbound platform, the reverse is taking place as passengers get ready to board a tram that will make a host of stops before reaching Cathedral Square in downtown Sheffield. Tram-train service operates every half hour, which is more frequent than the intercity DMU operation, which runs to and from the cities of Doncaster and Leeds and does not provide any distribution in Sheffield. This is a segment of a track map of the Supertram from a wonderful website from Germany called gleisplanweb.eu. It even has track maps of the Chicago, L, and Los Angeles Metro Rail. The connection from the Yellow Line to Meadowhall interchange onto Network Rail is called the Tinsley Core. And that is right here. This is the Yellow Line, and here's the Tinsley Cord. And as you can see, it's joined by the freight line that we saw in an earlier picture. It goes down to single track almost immediately and then hooks up with that freight line. After crossing the River Don on a single track bridge, there's a rail yard, and then the line is joined by Network Rail line from Meadowhall Interchange and Sheffield into Rotherham Central. So here is the Yellow Line going into Meadowhall Interchange, and the intercity line or regional line coming from Sheffield into the same Meadowhall Interchange, and then joining the tram train and going into Rotherham Central Station, which you saw in the previous images. I just mentioned that rolling stock with dual voltage or dual mode capability is an inherent part of the tram train concept. But in this Sheffield implementation, there is no need for two power systems. When the project was on the drawing board, there was talk of electrifying the railroad lines in the Sheffield area with Network Rail standard 25 kV, 50 hertz AC current. And so the Voslo cars were built with the capability to be powered by both 1500 volts DC and 25,000 volt AC carried in overhead lines. But the mainline electrification was canceled. So instead, Supertram's 1500 volt DC overhead was extended over the shared railway track. Thus, while the trams do have 25 kV capability, it is not used. And the only trackage electrified on the map is that used by trams. The pedestrian bridge for walkers and bikers, from which I took the next few photos, is an old, rather spindly structure located close to the Rotherham Parkgate terminal of the tram train service. This view is towards Sheffield and shows an outbound car. For the next, say, 100 yards, the track on the right is used by tram train cars in both directions, and so the leftmost track in the foreground has no wire. Inbound LRVs use the crossover. This view from the pedestrian bridge is toward the Parkgate terminal, which the inbound car has just left. There is no catenary above the pair of mainline tracks. And with the use of a telephoto lens, here is a Northern Trains DMU passing an LRV at the terminal. A closer-up view of one of Northern Trains Class 158 DMUs. These units were built from 1989 to 1992 by British Rail Engineering's Derby Works and can be found operating all over the British Isles. To complete the set, here are the two car types of Supertram's LRV fleet side by side along the Yellow Line. Back to the map. We're now going to take a look at the lines running through the south side of Sheffield. The blue line to halfway is my favorite, sporting all kinds of settings that show the versatility of light rail, including cross-country running, operation and traffic on extremely narrow streets, also side of the road, and through thick woods. When we arrived in Sheffield, there was bad news and good. The bad news was that there was no service over the long line from Gleadless Town End to Halfway. And that would be, here's Gleadless Town End and all the way to Halfway due to summer track renewal. But the good news was that Blue Line trams were being routed over the Purple Line to Herdings Park. And that's over here, that short line to the left, on a branch whose normal weekday and Saturday service consists of only one train per hour. The line leading from the Park Square Bridge to the south winds along a steep roadway with occasional excellent views of the city. The trams climb and curve dramatically as they overcome the grade along Park Grange Road from the city to the heights of the Cutler's View, Arborthorne, and Springlaw neighborhoods. Here is a Blue Line tram heading outbound to Gleadless Town End and Halfway, the view from 2017. Leighton Road is the only intermediate stop on the short Herdings Park branch and occurs right after the tracks turn away from Norton Avenue. The signal at left controls access to and from the single track through the charming forest that runs to the last stop. Herdings Park is a stub-end terminal with a short tail track. Now a few views from the line to Halfway. Parts of Sheffield Road in the village of Hackenthorpe are extremely narrow. Parking, standing, and stopping are definitely discouraged here. The Hackenthorpe stop about halfway to Halfway. We complete our look at Sheffield back at Cathedral Square with a view of Siemens Duvag Supertram 120. It is painted in the colors of Sheffield's legacy tramway, which was abandoned in October 1960. I could have ridden it on my first trip to Britain a few months before its abandonment, but chose to go to Blackpool instead. Pardon me while I take a drink. We reclaimed our bags and then returned by tram to the railroad station to continue our day's journey to Blackpool. To accomplish that, we had to change DMU trains at Manchester Piccadilly Station, a little under an hour's ride. We could have found a connecting train 15 minutes later, but why not make hay while the sun shines? Which is rather rare in Manchester based on my previous visits. Manchester Metrolink has grown to a 64-mile system with 8 lines since its opening in 1992. The high platform operation has served Piccadilly Station from the beginning with a basement terminal, which is now a through stop. Here is car 3068 emerging onto the street a little past 5 p.m., darting between long afternoon shadows. Another view with the rays of the sun reaching a space between the Hilton Doubletree Hotel and the 4 Piccadilly Place office tower as car 3127 turns onto Ayton Street. Manchester, with a population of over 500,000, is Britain's 5th largest city, but it has its largest tram system. Car 3072 represents the second generation of Metrolink rolling stock. It is running along Ayton Street toward Piccadilly Gardens in the heart of the city. Some 147 of these high-floor M5000 LRVs were built by Bombardier for Manchester and began entering service in 2009. For some reason, I can't help thinking that these bright yellow trams would also look at home among their similarly painted cousins in Alexandria, Egypt. With the sun sinking rapidly and about a quarter hour before the departure of the next DMU for Blackpool, we still had time to photograph some rush hour service in the station's basement. One last photo. Here we are in Blackpool on the next morning. Looks like Manchester. No, this is just a tease. The LRV in the photo happens to be in a bright yellow advertising wrap, so I thought the image would be a good transition from Manchester to Blackpool. This is the forecourt of Blackpool's North Station, now the principal railway station in this resort city on the Irish Sea. There also used to be a Blackpool Central and still is a Blackpool South that sports hourly local service. Until June 12th of last year, there was no tram service to this point. And so our main purpose for visiting here was to ride the extension, as I had been in Blackpool 7 years earlier. The actual terminal is on the other side of this passageway under a wing of a Holiday Inn. The North Station terminal consists of 2 tracks divided by an island platform after a scissors crossover. We paid the conductor of the car for a day pass using our credit cards. The extension is only about 4/10 of a mile long, entirely in the narrow roadway of Talbot Road, which it shares with motor traffic. The tracks join the main line, turning both north and south after the Talbot Square stop, which is only for North Station bound cars. Inbound trams stop at one of the 2 North Pier platforms, depending upon the direction they're heading, as shown on this map. The Blackpool Tramway runs from Fleetwood in the north, off the map, to Stargate in the south, also off the map, a distance of a little over 11 miles. Until the advent of the North Station branch, a single service was operated at a 15-minute frequency. Now there are 3 lines, each running every half hour, so that while each stop still sees a tram every 15 minutes, passengers wanting to travel between points on opposite sides of North Pier can now wait up to 30 minutes for a through car. Here's North Pier. And the services, now the T1 runs straight through, and then you have the T2 and the T3. I don't know how the traveling public has adjusted to that, especially as the walk between platforms at the Talbot Square North Pier station is not quick and easy. I suspect something will change. Perhaps a short-term service partially overlapping the T1 could be added. We're going to look at the Blackpool Tramway from north to south with images taken last summer and on my 2017 trip, although my first visit to this bustling resort on the Irish Sea was back in 1960. But unfortunately, the slides I took then have not been scanned, nor have been the ones from subsequent trips as well. And sadly, the network of 5 tram routes that existed then is now long gone. But what is still extant is wonderful. Although the line, now the T1, is most famous for its operation along Blackpool's promenade, it is fair to say that it takes on a number of other aspects as a street tramway and an interurban, as well as a beachfront serving holiday visitors seeking transportation between entertainment venues. Here is our golden car at the terminal in Fleetwood, which is a viable town in its own right, with a population of 26,000 that once had a major fishing industry and its own beach resorts, plus ferries that operated to the Isle of Man. The North Euston Hotel provides a very good confirmation of its previous importance. The outer terminal is on a single track clockwise loop, and shortly after cars get underway, they pass Fleetwood's lighthouse, or to be perfectly correct, Pharos Lighthouse. The 93-foot high building, modeled after the famous Pharos Lighthouse in Alexandria, Egypt, was completed in 1840 and is still in use. Despite being located on land and on a residential street to boot, when properly lined up with a shorter lighthouse on the beachfront, It is used to guide ships safely through the treacherous sandbanks of the nearby estuary where the River Wyre meets the Irish Sea. Inbound and outbound LRVs pass at the first stop beyond the terminal, Victoria Street, in a residential neighborhood that also contains popular retail shops. Moving a bit further southward in Fleetwood, an outbound tram is about to swing from Lord Street onto Albert. Up until now, I haven't spoken about the fleet of LRVs that make up Blackpool's roster. 16 of these Bombardier Flexity 2s were built in Bautzen, Germany in 2010, and 2 more were added in 2016 for the North Station expansion. The 100% low-floor 5-section double-enders are capable of 43 miles per hour. They replaced the entire legacy
I
fleet
did.
in
Oh
2011,
yeah, I
and at
wanted
that time,
those
line voltage
things
was
up on my
raised.
feet, those whatever it called.
I'm sorry? Did somebody ask a question?
No, they opened their mouth when and unmuted. I just
What?
muted them.
Well,
Everybody,
anyway, the
please please, if you have questions, put it in the chat. I will ask Jack, please do not unmute till the end of the program. Thank you. Go ahead, Jack.
these replaced the entire legacy fleet in 2011, and at that time the line voltage was raised from 550 volts to 600, ushering in Blackpool's modern era. Note that there is no room for parking on this narrow shopping street. After serving Fleetwood's business district, inbound trams are routed on to the perfectly groomed reserve track that first parallels a road, but then runs cross country through fields and meadows like an interurban electric railway. It traverses the village of Cleveleys on similar private right-of-way along the side of the road to Blackpool, where it begins to parallel the seacoast. The location of this photo is the Lindell Road stop in Fleetwood. At the cabin stop, the line's right-of-way becomes paved, and it remains between the sea and a street that carries motor traffic, including a parallel bus line. The street is officially named the Promenade. It is lined with hotels and all kinds of tourist accommodations. Here, just beyond Gin Square stop, a park separates the tram line from the coast. The route gets very close to the sea. Further south, the space will become a wide beach. This location is just beyond the Wilton Parade stop, and the white building is the President's Hotel. After the junction at North Pier, the line moves into the heart of Blackpool's entertainment district. This Lancashire city has a population of only about 140,000, but because of its seaside attractions, the number of visitors is over 100 times greater. But it has had its ups and downs, with tourism at its peak between the 2 world wars and right after the end of the Second World War, running about 17 million per year. And not coincidentally, the tramway was also at its peak then. But starting in the early 1960s, cheap airfare packages for holiday travel took many of Blackpool's traditional, mostly blue-collar visits abroad. With the beaches of Spain becoming affordable, many of these tourists opted for areas with a better and more dependable climate. The number of visitors declined to 11 million by 2000, which had a deleterious effect on the investment in the tramway as well. But that has now changed, probably from the efforts of the Chamber of Commerce and the rejuvenation of its family-oriented attractions and entertainment venues. In 2023, the number of visitors reached an all-time high of 20 million. The city's symbol and premier attraction is Blackpool Tower. Inspired by the Eiffel Tower, the 518-foot-high icon opened in 1894, and its complex contains the Tower Circus, Tower Ballroom, and roof gardens. One of the new attractions further southward in the Pleasure Beach complex is a 213-foot high roller coaster called the Big One. Another view here. The end of the line is at Stargate. The tracks merge behind the photographer and loop into the new car house, which was built in conjunction with the delivery of the new LRVs in 2011. This car will move forward, reverse ends, and then lay over at the opposite inbound platform. What do we have here? Yes, heritage trams were still operating on a regular schedule during the summer on my two visits, last summer and in 2017. This is a view of a southbound LRV through the windscreen of one of Blackpool's ubiquitous boat trams. But perhaps not for long. There is little purpose in dwelling on the announcement last month that such operation has been permanently withdrawn because it was followed by its retraction. But you never know. Balloon Tram 700 is stopped next to an LRV at Stargate. 27 of these double-deck cars were built by English Electric in 1934 and were the backbone of the fleet until the tramway's modernization in 2012. 9 balloons were upgraded starting in 2009 to meet disability regulations in order to supplement the new LRVs and for heritage service. One, number 711, was even painted into the LRV livery. This photo is from my 2017 trip. But now, here's the announcement of the heinous deed, which was made before political consequences were considered and was quickly retracted. A view from last July shows the 2 cars in heritage service and the siding across from the southbound platform at North Pier, where passengers were loaded for their extra fare heritage tour. In the background is the granite obelisk that rises opposite the northbound platform. Erected in 1923, the 100-foot-high Blackpool War Memorial and Center Path remembers all those lost in war. A 2017 view. Like the balloons, Blackpool's boat cars were built in 1934 by English Electric. 12 of the open trams were constructed and used for the tramway's popular circular city tours when the full network was still intact. 4 were scrapped in 1968, and of the remaining 8, 4 are now operating here in the US, with 3 at Muni in San Francisco and 1 at the National Capital Trolley Museum outside of Washington, D.C. 3 are still in Blackpool, while 1 is at the National Tramway Museum at Crich. Balloon number 715 is shown on the Pleasure Beach Loop in 2017. It is preserved in Blackpool's traditional color scheme. A big surprise to me in 2017 was the appearance of open-top Birmingham Tram 20 out for a test run, turning back just before the cabin stop. The beautifully restored four-wheeler was built by G.F. Milnes in 1900 and was on loan to Blackpool from the Rural Transportation Museum and Heritage Tramway in Merseyside. Note the Irish Sea in the left background. Couldn't resist showing another photo here because of the sky. To conclude our look at Blackpool, we go back to North Pier and further show the current layout with balloon number 700. Okay, here I'm going to take another drink and I have to change, I guess, what we call slide trays. So bear with me for a moment. At the end of our successful Sunday, Karl-Heinz and I moved on to Birmingham, England's second city. The 125-mile long trip took 2.5 hours with a change of trains at Preston. Unfortunately, no LRVs to photograph there, as we had done in Manchester just 24 hours earlier. Birmingham is just 110 miles northwest of London, and when we returned to the capital 3 days later, the rail running time was about half, around 80 minutes, due to express operation with no change-ins. Birmingham's population is 1.2 million, and its West Midland conurbation, which includes the city of Wolverhampton, is home to 4.3 million. The city's infrastructure has been considerably regenerated in recent years, encouraging its economy to become service-related with an emphasis on technology. Its modern rail system is called West Midlands Metro and connects the center of Birmingham and Wolverhampton, a distance of about 13 miles. Here, if you can see my cursor, is Birmingham, and over here is Wolverhampton. So the line runs across this way. I prefer to call the system Midland Metro, which was its official name from its inception in 1999 until its rebranding in 2018. In conjunction with our visit, we also traveled to Stourbridge, and that's over here. But we had to cancel our plans to go to the Black Country Living Museum, which has a tram operation similar to Beamish's, due to the tramway being shut down all summer due to maintenance. It's here in Dudley. The light rail line goes right through the redeveloped inner city. This view westward shows Birmingham Town Hall at the left. The pillared Corinthian temple-style building, built in 1834, is one of the city's concert halls, not the seat of its government, which is actually situated in Council House, the building on the right side of the photo. It also houses the Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery. The Octagon, Birmingham's first skyscraper, is shown in the center. The 49-story residential tower is reaching completion and is scheduled to be occupied this year. The 5-section LRV is headed for Wolverhampton via Birmingham's main railway station, New Street. Note the lack of overhead. All of the recent extensions to the system are wireless, as the rolling stock has batteries to power the cars for relatively short distances. Looking east, a westbound Midland Metro LRV pauses at the library stop in the heart of Birmingham's redeveloping Civic Center, which extends into what is now called the Paradise neighborhood. At right, 1 Centenary Square houses the United Kingdom headquarters of HSBC Bank, and Goldman Sachs selected 1 Centenary Way, the building in the background, as the home of its United Kingdom base. The LRVs also stop across from a side entrance to Birmingham's main station, New Street. Here is where cars extend or retract their pantographs. This is the main entrance to New Street. I found the name Grand Central in that location amusing for obvious reasons, but in this context, it refers to a large shopping center located above the station. The Midland Metro opened in 1999, running from Birmingham to Wolverhampton over the roadbed of the former Great Western Railway's Birmingham Snow Hill to Wolverhampton low-level line, which had been abandoned in sections in 1972, 1983, and 1992. The electric line did not serve the commercial centers of those cities at the time, but has since been extended piecemeal on both ends to accomplish that. With the latest extension to Edgbaston Village, the system is now 16 miles long. This view just before the new terminal, which was opened in 2022. Note the overhead used for charging the rolling stock's batteries just short of the understated bumper block in the background. Now we switch to the other end of the line, the forecourt of the Wolverhampton railway station, also without 750-volt overhead. The line was rerouted to this rebuilt railway station from its original terminal in 2023. Its fleet consists of 42 100% low-floor CAF Urbos 3 LRVs, the first going into service in 2014. These are the second generation of cars built for the system. The original equipment consisted of 16 70% low-floor T69 trams built by Ansaldo Breda. They lasted for 15 to 16 years only because they were prone to breakdowns, forcing the operation to experience significant reliability issues. Ansaldo Breda had problems with orders for Los Angeles, San Francisco, Shaker Heights, and Boston as well, and has since become Hitachi Rail. While we were photographing the cars here, we were approached by a good-looking young woman who wanted to know what we were doing. Turned out she was Sophie Allison, the managing director of Midland Metro, and was very pleased and a little surprised that visitors from the US and Germany were interested in her tramway. Cars operate on streets mixed with motor traffic and have two intermediate stops between the terminal and Priestfield, where the line goes onto the former railroad right-of-way. We had ridden outward from Birmingham and got off at Priestfield, at my suggestion, to photograph the street running and walk the line to the next stop. By we, I mean Karl Heinz, Andrew Beach, and Ian Cook, the latter two local traction enthusiasts. I've known Andrew for years, having been introduced to him by ERA member Bill Keir, and had traveled with him in various countries before. I didn't realize the distance between the two stops was over a mile, and since the temperature was about 85 degrees, my name was mud by the time we got to the next stop. Anyway, at least we were able to photograph quite a few cars. Midland Metro's weekday and Saturday headway is 10 minutes. We're just a few yards from Priestville, where the line transitions between street running and pure railroad type right-of-way. This photo was taken from a Wolverhampton-bound platform at Wednesbury Great Western Street, 6 stops down from Priestfield. The undertaking's car house and shop is located alongside, behind the fence at this point. But more importantly, this will be the starting point of Midland Metro's upcoming Line 2 to Dudley and Brierley Hill, which was just recently named the Black Country Metro. Intrigued by the name, I looked it up on Wikipedia and found that this area was one of the Industrial Revolution's birthplaces. Either a 30-foot thick coal seam close to the surface or the high level of air pollution created by the mix of nearby coal works, coke works, iron works, glass works, brickworks, and steel works led to the moniker, which first appeared in the 1840s. The branch is being built on the right-of-way of the former Great Western Railway's South Staffordshire line. Lodge Road, West Bromwich Town Hall, that's a mouthful for a station name, is another 4 stops further toward Birmingham. I think the architecture at this stop is very clever. Without doubt, an elevator is hidden by the LRV. The Hawthorns, 4 more stops, is a transfer point between the Midland Metro and the former Great Western Birmingham Snow Hill to Kidderminster line. Between this point and Snow Hill, the two lines operate parallel to each other on a 4-track right-of-way. You can see the diesel line's tracks turning at the far left to join the light rail line. The tram is bound for Birmingham. Same place 7 years earlier. When delivered starting in 2012, the first 21 of the 42 CAF cars were painted magenta and white. An artistic view with a Birmingham-bound tram taken from the railroad side of the Hawthorne Station access mezzanine. Same spot in 2024 with the front of an outbound West Midland trains class 172 DMU set leaving the Hawthorne Station. Again, this time a Birmingham-bound West Midlands train. Bombardier built these Turbostar 2 and 3 car DMUs starting in 2010, and the four of us boarded one just like it to head to Stourbridge Junction, some 20 minutes away, where we accomplished an across-the-platform transfer to the Parry People Mover. I had read about this countless number of times in modern tramway and urban transport.
Hi, guys.
Touted it as an economical, energy-efficient solution for Britain's lightly trafficked branch line problem.
Take a walk?
The two four-wheelers were built by John Parry in 2008 and
Was
went
an
into
extended, it
service
was a
in
Martin Luther King
2009.
thing?
Yes, which you may not have realized.
Oh,
So
great, so it was a special service.
So, yeah.
Service with the minister that your congregation has been partnered with.
Right, I know who that is.
And
Oh,
so
that's
they
great,
had
so you hit,
speeches and talks
I
and
told you
interviews.
it would be
So
something
it
special.
lasted probably about 40 minutes longer than it
Well,
would
was
have
it
otherwise,
worthwhile?
and I don't mean that in a
There's
bad way.
cross
No, 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 I
conversation,
understand.
Was
cross conversation.
powerful and many references to what's happening on Monday on the Martin Luther
Martin
King
Luther
Day.
King Day, yeah.
Meaning
These
Martin
two
Luther-
four-wheelers were built by John
No,
Parry.
Martin Luther King. No, there was some like
Illusions.
Veiled, yeah,
Yada,
because they
yada.
can't be political.
But it was
Who ran the regular service?
the minister
Oh,
and she had him,
the,
rabbi and the minister.
Which rabbi?
the
Sure.
one who was
It's a
from
female.
Wait, stop. The one who replaced Linda at
Hey,
Union.
Bob, mute your
Stephanie
mic.
Kohler.
Yes,
Okay.
Stephanie.
So she ran it, yes,
Yes.
she's a,
Let me know when you want to continue.
It was a
she
reading.
looks very young, she's actually in her mid-40s.
Hey, come on.
Not my age, I thought.
Yeah, I think, oh shit, who's calling me? What's the problem? Fuck. Open the mic. Wait a minute. Ugh, what now?
These cars were built before reliable rechargeable batteries were adopted for light rail operations. They're not powered by electricity or fossil fuel, but use a rotating flywheel for power, albeit its small engine is started by liquid petroleum gas. According to Wikipedia, the rotating flywheel captures the vehicle's kinetic energy when the brakes are used and reuses the energy for acceleration. In other words, regenerative braking. Nothing new about that. This eliminates the need for a large diesel engine. The small onboard engine is used to initially bring the flywheel up to speed, to add speed to the flywheel after the vehicle is started in motion, and to provide power for the onboard systems. Of course, we now know that Parry did not catch on, but it's an interesting enough chapter in the history of lightweight rail cars. Eventually, it will just be a footnote. These Class 139 units are operated by West Midland Trains on the shortest rail line in Britain, between Stourbridge Junction and Stourbridge Town, a distance of about 3/4 of a mile. The service enjoys the best headways of any railroad line in the United Kingdom, operating every 10 minutes. With a one-way trip taking only 3 minutes, only one of the two cars on the roster operate on any particular day, making the intensive service very economical in cost. The car's capacity is 60 passengers. Unfortunately, the ride is not very smooth, despite the slow maximum speed of 20 miles per hour. The line is single track, originally part of the now mostly abandoned Great Western Railway's South Staffordshire line to Brierley Hill and Wednesbury Great Western Street, which is under reconstruction as Midland Metro Line 2, which I mentioned before. The end of the line is the bumper block at Stourbridge Town. Seeing and riding this, I couldn't help but think of the former Pennsylvania Railroad Princeton branch, which serves the same purpose but is a bit longer and has much less frequent service. Perhaps Henry Posner's modern pop-up metro could become a successful successor to the Parry People Mover and could be adopted for use on the branch between Princeton Junction and Princeton. The pop-up metro is demonstrated at the Rock Hill Trolley Museum, East Broad Top in Orbisonia, Pennsylvania. It is also possible that we could see it someday operating on the old Crandick interurban line in Iowa. As a side note, John Parry passed away in 2023 at the age of 85. As mentioned earlier, our planned visit to the Black Country Living Museum for the next day was scotched, and so we substituted a visit to the National Tramway Museum at Crich. Crich is just over 50 miles from Birmingham, and fortunately Andrew Beach graciously offered to drive us there. To avoid traffic congestion, he suggested we ride a train from Birmingham New Street to Lichfield, Trent Valley. The ride in this EMU local would take about 40 minutes. Lichfield is the end of the line, so trains lay over before their return trip. Here's a photo of our Class 323 EMU from the station parking lot. Interestingly, these units from 1994 were retired from service on September 27th, less than 2 months after we rode them. They were built by the Hunslet Engine Company, which has since been acquired by Waptec. Crich has an operable fleet of some 80 trams, and this is the first one I wanted to see. Former Third Avenue Railway System lightweight car 674 was one of 60 built in the 65th Street shops in 1939 and was part of a group of 42 that were shipped to Vienna as Marshall Plan aid and operated there until 1969. Because they ran in the Austrian capital, they were still around when the preservation movement reached full strength, and so quite a few were saved. In the US, they can be found operating on occasion at Brantford, Kennebunkport, and Wheaton, Maryland. At the National Museum here, the 674 is no longer operated, but it did run there until 1979 in Vienna colors with a pantograph, and then after restoration until 1985 in this Third Avenue livery. Of course, it was not regularly operated on the B Broadway line, but usually could be found on the X 59th Street Crosstown and T 3rd and Amsterdam lines in Manhattan, and on S Southern Boulevard and Tremont Avenue in my home borough, the Bronx. But I suspect that displaying the car with a B Broadway plate sign makes it more recognizable as a symbol of New York City. Here's a view of one of the 50 so-called Amerikaners in operation at the end of Route 132 in the Vienna suburb of Strebersdorf in 1960, with two real Amerikaners posing in front, Richard Solomon and me. The ersatz plate sign was made up by another ERA member and Bronxite, the late Ronald Schleisman. Den Haag PCC 1147 brings back lots of good memories for me, as in the late 1960s I lived and worked in that beautiful city, and so cars like these also became a part of my life. I first come across these American-style streamliners on my visit to that city in 1960. At that time, 124 PCCs were on the HTM roster, including the 1147. And by 1966, all service on the network was provided by PCCs. Because of the construction of new lines and increased ridership, the Hague's roster reached a total of 234, including 30 non-driving trailers for MU operation. All were built under license by La Bourgeoise et Nivelle in Belgium, with the first two actually being constructed from a kit supplied by the St. Louis Car Company. Because they were all single-ended, it is impractical to operate the 1147 at Crich, and so it is being displayed in the exhibition hall. Glasgow number 1297 is also one of the cars displayed in the exhibition hall, which is chock full of interesting equipment. Its theme is the century of trams, telling the story of 100 years of tramway development from 1860 to 1960 by decade, and the cars are organized in that manner. This unit also falls into the post-war era, as it is one of the last double-deck tram cars to have been built in Britain. Constructed in 1948 in the workshops of Glasgow Corporation Transport, it was one of the first of a new class of 100 units that became known as Cunarders. Very similar in appearance, but larger than Glasgow's pre-war coronation units, I had the privilege of riding and photographing both types in regular service on my first overseas journey in 1960, as well as some older cars that were still holding down service in Scotland's largest city. One would think with that name, the operator of Britain's most famous and luxurious passenger ships and cruise liners, Cunard Lines, might have had something to do with their construction, but that was not the case. There are a number of theories of why these cars received that appellation. Both the Cunard steamships Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth were built in the Glasgow shipyards, and thus residents were very proud of them. Considered to be the ultimate in luxury, Glaswegians found similarities between the ocean liners and the new cars, specifically the moquette fabric with leather trim used on the seats, the tram's rubberized floorings and stair treads, and the use of some Art Deco embossing, which of course had nothing to do with their technology or operating characteristics. It turned out they were less sturdy and dependable than they should have been. The final car of the series, number 1392, was constructed in 1952 and ran in service for only 10 years, as the last of Glasgow's trams were replaced by buses in 1962. Now we move on to an earlier period in the century of trams with ex-Blackpool car 249. This unit looks very similar to the balloon cars that we had ridden and seen operating in that coastal city 3 days earlier. And this luxury dreadnought double-decker was introduced as one of 13 similar units with an open top in the year 1934. The car's top was covered in 1941 or 42, and for all practical purposes, it became another English electric balloon. It was withdrawn from operation at Crich in 2007 because of motor failure. Now to the earliest equipment in the exhibit hall. Chesterfield and Brampton Horse Car 8 was built in 1899 by G.F. Milnes and Company and is shown with its own detachable motive power. With a capacity of only 16 passengers, the four-wheeler was retired in 1904 when the city of Chesterfield electrified its network. At that time, it was converted into a glorified gazebo and resided in a private garden. Fortunately, it was rescued in 1934 by the chairman of the city's transportation subcommittee and transferred to a bus garage before being overhauled by Chesterfield's transport department. This made it one of the earliest trams ever having been preserved, predating by over a decade the post-war inception of today's streetcar preservation movement. Two more ancient cars. At left, Porto Portugal Car 9 was built by Starbuck Car and Wagon of Birkenhead, England in 1873, and first was pulled by a pair of mules, presumably insufficient for the steep hill on today's heritage Route 18 in Porto on Rua de Restauração. It later became a trailer and was pulled first by steam cars and then electric ones in that city until retirement in 1960, when it was sent back to the country of its manufacture. It is the oldest tram in Crich's collection and is displayed alongside the second oldest, number 15, which was constructed for Sheffield by the same car builder 1 year later. The horse car survived because in 1901 it was electrified for use as a work car, mainly for towing disabled equipment and for transferring cars between facilities. That duty was completed in 1946, and it was reconverted to a horse car again in time to participate in the Sheffield Corporation Tramway Jubilee Parade on July 11th, 1946. With the forthcoming abandonment of Sheffield's tramways in 1960, the 15 was purchased from the operator and delivered to Crich in 1959. During its long operational life at Crich, Sheffield 15 has been pulled by a succession of horses, but following the retirement of Joseph in 2019, it has been regulated to being displayed as a static exhibit in the exhibition hall. Southampton number 45 is another important car in the history of the tramway preservation movement in Britain. The open-top double-deck single trucker was constructed in 1903 by the Hurst Nelson Company in Motherwell, Scotland. Rebuilt many times, the unit looks a bit squat, as it is shorter than the average tram, because it was designed to contend with extremely low clearance beneath Southampton's medieval Bargate Arch. With no roof over the upper deck, passengers had to be warned to remain seated while aboard any of these cars passing under the arch. Written notices also instructed passengers not to touch the overhead wire. Nowadays, dual-mode wireless cars would run through with their pantographs down. But this belies the importance of the unit, as it was the first to be preserved by a group of rail enthusiasts, at least in the United Kingdom. Members and Friends of the Light Railway Transport League on a pre-abandonment charter trip over the Southampton system in August 1948 decided to purchase their first tram on that occasion, and the corporation agreed to sell number 45 to them for the princely sum of 10 British pounds. I don't know whether they passed around a hat to raise the money or got it together later. Actually, they were aboard number 44 at the time, but the tramway's management indicated that number 45 of the same series was in better condition, so this is the tram that the group got. For the 12 years before it arrived at Crich, it was moved several times to different locations. I'm showing a photo of Gateshead and District Tramway Company, Car 5, mainly because Karl Heinz and I transferred to the Tyne and Wear Metro in that town a few days earlier when we visited Newcastle. Despite being adjacent to that city, Gateshead had its own network of lines and, interestingly enough, was privately owned. Unsuitable for double-deckers because of the need to negotiate a low bridge near the Gateshead railway station at the hub of the network, this single-decker was built in-house at the company's own shops in 1927. With a huge ridership and missing the luxury of double-deck capacity, the company introduced an innovative passenger flow system to speed operation, whereby passengers boarded the tram at the rear using sliding doors that were operated by the conductor, and exited from the front using a hinged door that was controlled by the driver. Motorists were then warned of these novel front exit arrangements by the large painted panel on both dashes, as can be seen in this view in the exhibition hall. In addition, as the door opened, a large "Stop Danger" sign that was fixed to the door protruded from the car at the same time as illuminated stop signs appeared on the rear dash. Also note the advertising displayed on the tram's roof. Under private ownership, revenue from advertising was important, and placards were placed inside and outside in as many places as possible. Number 5 was withdrawn from service upon closure of the Gateshead system in August 1951, but soon enough it was purchased by British Railways for use on its Grimsby and Birmingham interurban electric line. It was renumbered as G&I 20 and painted green in British Railways fleet livery, and provided another 10 years of intensive service on a line that operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was decommissioned for a second time a decade later when the Grimsby and Birmingham line closed in July 1961. Sadly, I could have ridden it during my trip to Britain in 1960, but instead chose to spend more time than I originally planned in London and visited Blackpool instead. I also missed the end of streetcar operations in Sheffield and on the Swansea and Mumbles interurban line, much to my regret. Number 5 was acquired by the Tramway Museum Society and brought to Crich in 1963. I could show more photos of static cars at Crich, but there are time constraints, so we'll move outdoors through the demonstration car line. 2 trams in its huge fleet of operable units were running on this weekday in July, which ensured there would be crowds waiting to board. Chesterfield number 7 was the double-decker doing the honors today, and it is shown at the Town End tram stop in Period Street, the inner terminal of the line. The buildings and the ambience here are much like those we found in Beamish, highlighting village life while offering the public facilities for their needs and enjoyment, such as a cafe and pub, and authentic relics like a police box, telephone booth, and a 1930s clock to regulate departure times of the trams. A side view of Chesterfield 7 at the museum's entrance and exit. The large double truck tram was built by Brush in 1904 with an open top that was closed in 1919. The car continued in service only until 1927 when the tramway was abandoned. It was first converted into 2 holiday homes with the 2 decks sitting side by side, but then began living a Perils of Pauline type of life, experiencing a kitchen explosion which demolished one of the car's platform ends in 1934 and later was burgled by Italian prisoners of war. After the war, was used as a honeymoon location, then now narrowly avoided a moorland fire, and before it was acquired by the museum in 1973 for £10, provided a comfortable home for an elderly lady for some 14 years, starting in 1954. After a huge restoration effort, the tramcar was ceremoniously launched into passenger service in 1997. The view from the Bowes Lion pedestrian bridge, also near the entrance and exit. The museum was built on the site of an abandoned limestone quarry in Derbyshire, which was acquired in 1959. Less than a decade later, the organizers began creating the tramway village on its south end. Today, the mostly single-track line extends for a length of 1 mile, with appropriate passing sidings and double track that as many as 18 cars can be operating at one time with the use of platooning. Atop the limestone cliffs is Crich Stand, a memorial tower erected in 1923 to the memory of the 11,409 members of a local regiment who died in the First World War. The other car on the line was yet another Blackpool boat tram, a sister of the one we rode 2 days earlier natively in that coastal city. It is shown from the ground at the same location. The inbound car has just passed under the Bowes Lion Bridge on interlaced track and is alongside the lead to Crich's workshop, yard, and exhibit buildings. The pedestrian bridge uses ironwork cast in 1844 and was originally installed on the Bowes Lion estate in Ware, Hertfordshire. But after being donated to the museum, it was placed in this location in 1992. It has an isolated stretch of horse tram track implanted on its surface, but its authenticity is questionable. The boat tram is shown at the Victoria Park stop, just south of the bridge, where a Victorian garden with a bandstand has been recreated. Note the attractive platform furniture. We leave Crich with a view of both cars side by side in the village. Let me take another drink. We took a fast train on the following morning from Birmingham New Street to London Euston. 1 hour and 20 minutes for the 110-mile trip on an express, computing to an average speed of 83 miles per hour. But there was a glitch, as upon arriving at the station, we saw our train was canceled. Panic? Try to make a reservation for a future one? No. Hop aboard the preceding one, as the departure board indicated it had not yet left, as fortunately we had arrived at Birmingham New Street early. We found 2 empty forward-facing seats together, and when the conductor came by later to check tickets, he didn't say a word when we presented ours for the other train. Anyway, this would be our second stay in the London area, and again we would be making some day trips to other places of rail interest. So let's start with our first excursion, our longest, which we took at the beginning of our trip 8 days earlier. It was to the Seaton tramway, located in Devon, well west on the south coast of England, some 160 miles from London's Waterloo Station. There is no longer any rail service to the town, so we had to settle on a train to Axminster, a 2 3/4 hour, 145-mile ride at an average speed of 53 mph, culminating with a half-hour bus ride, fortunately right to the door in the center of Seaton for an on-time arrival at 11:15. We rode aboard a DMU, as Southwestern's third rail stretches only for about 50 miles from London as far as Basingstoke. Here is a photo of the Axminster station, built in 1860 to a Gothic design. A mural in the men's room of the Seaton ticket office and gift shop provided Carl, Heinz, and me with a preview of what to expect. The Seaton tramway operates a 3-mile-long narrow-gauge heritage electric railway between Seaton, Colliford, and Colleton in East Devon's Axe Valley, traveling along the River Axe estuary through 2 nature reserves. And that is one of the things that makes the line different from the museum operations we visited at Beamish and Crich, with their charming villages depicting life in previous centuries, and makes it appealing to different kinds of visitors, in this case, nature lovers. There are 5 stations, including one, Seaton Wetlands Halt, specifically aimed to attract bird watchers. Thus, we saw as many passengers riding with binoculars as with cameras. We'll start our photographic journey from the opposite end of the line at Colleton Station. Yes, the railway is certainly electric, and that, of course, is what makes it so intriguing and so enjoyable to folks like me and Karl Heinz. Its gauge is 2 feet 9 inches, 838 millimeters, and its overhead is energized at only 120 volts DC. Its history is most interesting, but complicated. The end of the track at Colleton Station. Number 6 is one of the 13 cars on Seaton's roster. Their dimensions mimic the real thing, except they are narrower than normal-sized trams, running from only 4 to 5 feet wide. Here, the operator will walk the tram's trolley pole around and then take the car a few yards down to the passenger loading point. The tramway was the brainchild of Claude Lane, the owner of a battery electric vehicle manufacturing plant and a tram enthusiast. In 1949, he constructed a fully portable streetcar system that he initially displayed at garden parties, fetes, and similar events. From that beginning, his project grew like Topsy, first in 1953 into a permanent site at Eastbourne for a 2-foot gauge line, and finally into the current 2-foot 9-inch gauge operation here at Seaton, the latter thanks to a certain Mr. Beeching axing the British Railways branch from Seaton to the South Western Railway main line via Colleton in 1966. Mr. Lane increased the gauge because he wanted to build a longer line, and by only 9 inches because the trucks on the existing cars could not be widened beyond that amount. Car 8 was the first new car built in 1968, 2 years before the relocation to Seaton opened. It is based on trams that were first operated in Bournemouth and later on the Llandudno and Colwyn Bay Electric Railway in Wales. Sadly, Mr. Lane died in 1971, but his heirs still run Modern Electric Tramways Limited, the name of his company and the operator here in Seaton. Here is car 6 on the outbound track at the Colleton terminal. The station itself was originally constructed in 1868, and post-Beeching it was reopened in 1980, enlarged and improved with a cafe and shop added, along with other amenities. It also has a large parking lot, and those arriving by automobile find it a good place to commence their visits. A further view showing tram 12 operating on charter. It was built in 1966 to resemble a Blackpool balloon, but has since taken on aspects of a London Feltham car. Another view at Colleton showing tram 11 and the restored freight house from the original railway. It should be mentioned that most cars on Seaton's roster were built new by the tramway, but there are also some units, like number 11, whose bodies were manufactured by a private company in Bolton, and even more interesting, some were constructed from the bodies of retired cars from other properties. The Bolton-built 11 arrived at Seaton in 2007 and is partly styled based on design elements from trams that formerly operated in Plymouth and Blackburn. Much of the fun in riding the Seaton tramway in the summer comes from the views and breezes experienced from the upper deck of the tram cars. It's also good photography, especially at passing sidings, such as this one below Colleton, called Axmouth. Here we are waiting for an opposite number after having caught up to number 6, which happened to be the outbound car we rode in upon our arrival at Seaton earlier in the day. On a repeat performance, we were allowed to get off, and I took this view of 2 cars passing. You've seen number 12 before, but not number 9, which, like the 11, is another Bolton constructed unit, also with inspiration from Plymouth and Blackburn, but this time built in 2004. The scheduled journey time for a trip from one end of the line to the other is 27 minutes. Trams were operating on a 20-minute headway, which meant 4 cars could have covered the schedule. With 2 other passing sidings, which the Brits call passing loops, it is possible to have as many as 8 trams operating on the line at a given time. Today we saw only 6, but that was plenty enough to make it a great day. Here is number 9 again, approaching the Colliford grade crossing from Colleton on the single track. Colliford Station was the end of the line when operations began in 1970, as the portion I just showed wasn't regauged and rehabilitated for service until 1980. Thus the intricate station layout here. Colleton-bound Car 2 was built in 1964 and is based on trams that operated on the Metropolitan Electric Tramways network in London's northern suburbs. Here is number 6 again, this time heading to Seaton. Note the unelectrified siding at right. Our last view at Culliford shows the switches on the Seaton end. Car 14 is Colleton bound. By far the oldest tram on the property, the 14 was built in 1904 as number 94 of Metropolitan Electric Tramways and operated in London's northern suburbs until 1935. It then became a garden shed until rescued by a group of enthusiasts in 1961 for eventual use at Eastbourne. Its top deck was removed in 1968 and its body was narrowed, but it did not go into service at Seaton until 1984. Now we move on to Seaton Wetlands Halt, the next stop and next passing siding, where cars 11 and 14 are pausing. The passengers from car 11, the 14 is being used for driver's training, are accessing a boardwalk that will take them to the heart of Black Hole Marsh in the River Axis estuary, where they should be able to see plenty of wading birds and ducks in the reed beds from the many trails, as well as birds in flight, and also plenty of trams ambling by, crossing the little bridge over a tributary of the swamp, like number 14. Now back to the stop for two more photos, one of car 9 and the other of car 2. The last stop before the Seaton terminal is the Riverside Halt, which is also the location of the shop and storage complex. Car 6 pauses on this relatively short section of double track and is shown in all its post-rack glory. Here, Seaton-bound car 8 passes Colleton-bound 6. The car house, which is located behind the photographer, is not regularly open to the public. The line then turns away from the right-of-way of the former British Railways route and heads towards its terminal in the center of Seaton, where we originally boarded. This is the second station on that site, a modern, fully enclosed building containing a 4-track terminal, as well as the usual amenities, which opened in 2018. Here is car 14 boarding passengers. Alongside is number 16, marked for driving lessons. A few times each month, the tramway offers the driver's eye experience, which gives its participants, for a fee of £60, 40 minutes at the controller. Here, car 16 awaits its next pupil. Like car 14, the 16 is not a replica. Its body comes from Bournemouth open-top tram 106, which was built in 1921. After the 3-foot 6-inch gauge system in that Dorset resort was closed in 1936, it served on a farm until acquired by a transportation preservation group, which donated to Seaton Tramway in 1974, where it was cut to a single deck car. Like the 14, it was also narrowed. After our satisfying 4.5-hour visit, we retraced our steps, but first grabbed this photo of an outbound DMU similar to the one in which we rode back to London. The Class 195 Sprinters were built by British Rail Engineering in Derby, starting in 1993. Okay, give me a moment for another drink.
Showing you through a pressure coat. Yeah. That's bad.
Our final one-day excursion, taken on our penultimate day in Britain, August 1st, was for the purpose of enjoying a sample of the nation's abundance of heritage steam railways. It is said there are more than 100 of them scattered, or actually concentrated, in the United Kingdom, with one of the best close by our final lodgings in the London area, Croydon. We decided to stay in that London suburb because it would make riding London's only light rail system very convenient, and I would be flying home from nearby Gatwick Airport. Another bonus of being there would be its proximity to the Bluebell Railway, considered by many as among the finest heritage railways in Britain. It and many of its standard gauge brethren were created through successful preservation efforts after their respective closures in the late 1950s and 1960s from the Beeching Acts. According to the literature, the Bluebell Railway includes a fine collection of vintage steam locomotives which run along an 11-mile stretch of track in the beautiful Sussex countryside. Railway lovers can experience the recreated trains hailing from the 1880s through to the 1960s, end quote. The Bluebell Railway runs across 11 miles from East Grinstead in Sussex to Sheffield Park, with way stations at Kingscote and Horsted Keynes. It originally was part of the London, Brighton, and South Coast Railway and was later merged into the Southern Railway and then British Railways Southern Region before its abandonment. The LB and SC line via East Grinstead and Lewes to the port of Newhaven. We keep seeing Newhaven, where ferries ran to Dieppe in France in conjunction with train connections to Paris, was a slower route than its mostly parallel main line through Haywards Heath. So it was the faster route, which additionally served the resort of Brighton, that got third rail electrification. Ferries and hovercraft continue to run between Newhaven and Dieppe, and commuter trains operate from East Grinstead to London's Victoria and London Bridge stations, a distance just short of 30 miles. The authorities did not think the commuter traffic to Lewes over the slower route was sufficient to continue operating the line, and thus the approximately 20-mile section from East Grinstead to Lewes was abandoned in 1958. The Bluebell inaugurated operations over a portion of the line in 1960, less than 3 years after its abandonment by British Railways. The commuter service from London to East Grinstead was dieselized in 1964 and electrified with third rail in 1987. Thus, our ride from East Croydon to East Grinstead was aboard an EMU and took about 40 minutes. A friend, Richard Horn, who lives near Croydon, joined us and boarded our train at a stop 5 minutes out of East Croydon. We had but a few yards to walk to the Bluebell station and platform. Here it is after the arrival of the Grinny Flyer, the first of 5 round trips, one every 75 minutes, scheduled on this summer weekday. Here is the train approaching East Grinstead about a minute earlier. 460 number 6989 was one of the last steam locomotives ordered by the Great Western Railway, but it was not delivered until the railways in Britain were nationalized on January 1st, 1948. So was never operated by that private sector organization. The locomotive was delivered in 1948 and remained in service only until 1954. But this explains why its tender carries the British Railways Herald. We rode all the way to the southern end of the line at Sheffield Park, which is the heart of the Bluebell's operation and is a magnet for visitors with its shop, model railway, museum, and even a pub. It's a 40-minute trip, which we accomplished in a coach. Had we paid a first-class fare, we could have ridden in this kind of comfort. The 7598 was built in 1903 for the London, Brighton, and South Coast, the former owner of these rails. It is especially luxurious, containing only 6 seats per compartment, and there are only 6 compartments in the car, or should I say carriage. It operated on express trains between Victoria Station and Brighton or Eastbourne, popular resorts on the English Channel, until it was taken out of service in the early 1930s, probably at the same time as the electrification of the line to Brighton. Here's a view of one of the locomotives in the Bluebell's Museum. 060 number 65 was built in 1896 for freight service on the nearby London, Chatham, and Dover Railway. Its only major rebuild occurred in 1908, when a domed boiler was installed and its classification changed from O to O1, which it carried when running for successor roads, the Southeastern and Chatham, and then just Southeastern, until it was finally withdrawn in 1961 by British Railways. These engines mainly pulled coal trains, and most were retired before World War II. Apparently, the 65 is operable. Sheffield Park is a busy place. Here's our locomotive running around the Grinny Flyer to prepare for its forthcoming run back to East Grinstead. We fell back a 75-minute headway and observed more action, including an all-dining car extra called the Wheeldon Rambler Afternoon Tea Special. The appetizing menu includes sandwiches, hors d'oeuvres, and pastries, and of course, plenty of clotted cream and strawberry preserves. In addition to the first-class fare and dining supplement, patrons are required to adhere to a dress code. It was being pulled by number 73082, a British Railway Standard Class 5 locomotive built in 1955 for mixed traffic. 172 of these 460 Camelots were built for mixed use and were sadly gone before the end of the 1960s. We then rode the next Grinstead Flyer to Horsted Keynes, which is the largest station on the line and restored to its 1920 appearance. The makeover was so successful that it won a number of awards. Restored to the Southern Railway period of the mid-1920s, the station is particularly popular with film and television companies and was used as the filming location for Downton Abbey. It has 5 platforms and is the location where up and down trains pass each other. This is my favorite photo of the line, as the sun briefly came out on this hot and humid 86-degree day. 2 lines once used the station, and the other, which ran westward to Hayward Heaths, was electrified with third rail, but you cannot see any remains of that line, which was discontinued in 1963. Thus, there was a short period from 1960 to 1963 where both Bluebell and British Railway trains shared the station's facilities. Can't be done, obviously. But then I've seen it work successfully at Scepter's Warminster station when New Hope and Ivyland trains are extended to that Bucks County community for an event. My last photo of the Bluebell, showing our train back to East Grinstead, the Sussex Scott, alongside the Grinny Flyer. It is being pulled by tank locomotive 80151, which was built in 1957 and lasted only until 1967. The standard class 264Ts were based on locomotives designed for the London, Midland, and Scottish, and were used for local and commuter service. We had a very good day on the Bluebell and decided its reputation is well deserved. As I mentioned, the accommodations for our final stay in London were actually located in the suburb of Croydon, south of the Thames, and home of the London Tramlink, formerly called Croydon Tramlink, and now named London Trams. No matter what its name, it is the light rail system of Britain's capital city and dates back to the year 2000. After arriving from Birmingham at Euston Station on July 31st, we rolled our bags over to St. Pancras and rode a Thameslink EMU to East Croydon, a half-hour's ride, and found our hotel in the center of town, about a half block from the location of this photo. The weather was perfect, and we were back out on the street in a jiffy, ready to ride and photograph the 18-mile light rail network. The system is centered around London's suburb of Croydon, 11 miles south of Piccadilly Circle. Croydon is a major regional center on its own, with a population of around 200,000 within the town. The entire borough has 340,000. For comparison's sake, Yonkers, New York also has a population of 200,000, and its Getty Square is about 12 miles north of Times Square. The light rail network runs generally east-west, with a large amount of it built over the rights-of-way of abandoned British railways lines. Of the three outer destinations, and you can see them here as Beckenham Junction, Elmer's End, and New Addington. Only the line to New Addington was built for light rail. This particular line from New Addington loops through the center of Croydon over one-way trackage, and you can see that over here. While trams on the other two routes, Elmer's End and Beckenham Junction, run through to Wimbledon. Tramlink, which is the name I'll use, opened in 2000. To continue our comparison, 1947 was the last year it was possible to ride entirely by streetcar from 42nd Street to Getty Square, while 1951 was the last year of tram service from the Thames embankment to Croydon. And now both cities have congestion pricing. Anyway, that's where the comparison will end, as London now has modern light rail and New York City has BUPKIS, an abbreviation for Select Bus Service. In addition to operation over railroad rights-of-way, Croydon's trams run over traditional reserved track that follows the area's road pattern and even has some track and pavement. We'll look at the street running first, which centers around the borough of Croydon itself. This view is along George Street, which is lined by retail establishments and partly pedestrianized. Another view on George Street, this time from 2016. I've been to Croydon 4 times and have always enjoyed riding and photographing here and observing the high ridership of the system. Base service to New Addington runs every 7.5 minutes, with frequencies on the other two lines being 10 minutes each. Thus, along the stretch past the East Croydon rail station, there are trams every 3 minutes in each direction. Tramlink's popularity could be based in part by its connectivity. The gray dashed lines represent passenger rail lines. Riders can transfer to and from Southeastern, Southern, and/or Thameslink trains at the 2 stations in Croydon, and they are here, West Croydon, and here, East Croydon. And Southeastern, Southern, or Thameslink trains at all 3 terminals, including Wimbledon, which is over here, which is also reachable by a branch of London's Underground. And as you can see, there are connections at a few way stations like Mitcham Junction as well. While George Street carries the trams west of the East Croydon station, Addiscombe Road hosts the cars on the east side. Eastbound car 2534 pauses at the Lebanon Road stop, where it shares the street with motor traffic. This Bombardier Flexity Swift CR400 is one of 24 built for the opening of the system in the year 2000. The 70% low-floor cars were numbered starting with 2530, continuing from the highest numbered tram of London's legacy fleet, similar to what was done on U.S. properties like the modern streetcar lines in Detroit, Kansas City, and Cincinnati. Westbound car 2560 has just loaded passengers diagonally across the same street. It is one of 12 Variotram LRVs built by Stadler between 2011 and 2016 to supplement Tramlink's original fleet, allowing the service frequency to be ramped up to current levels. The ends of the 2 types of equipment are contrasted in this view at the same location. The next stop is Sandilands. Here is where the street running begins. The westbound tram is just emerging from the cut and T junction where the new Addington route meets the line from Beckenham Junction and Elmer's End. In 2016, there was a fatal accident at the T junction when a tram carrying 69 passengers derailed at a speed of 45 miles per hour on a curve calling for a maximum of 12 mph. 7 were killed and 19 suffered serious injuries. As a result, the lines east of Croydon were shut down for a week and stringent safety measures were invoked. We'll first head out to New Addington. Its route is entirely new after it leaves the railroad right-of-way. The line is quite attractive, entirely on reserved track with much hidden from parallel roads. This view is just short of the Lloyd Park stop. Flexity 2530 has just passed a London bus on its way to the end of the line at New Addington. Prior to its stop at Gravel Hill, it traversed a section of right-of-way through woods hidden by trees and now moves onto Center Reservation. Feltway is 2 stops further on. Here is a variotram. Just prior to entry into the island platform at the New Addington terminal, there is a short section of single track as a large hospital complex limits clearance for double track. Now we head to the Beckenham Junction and Elmer's End lines, which are entirely on railroad rights-of-way. Our first photo is at the Woodside station on what was formerly the Woodside and South Croydon Joint Railway and the Southeastern Railway line to Elmer's End, which the light rail line follows. The station opened in 1885, and as you can see, the building still stands. The branch was electrified with third rail in 1926, but after World War II, it declined in use, and in 1997 was shut down for construction of the light rail line. The Flexity is en route to Elmer's End. The junction of the Beckenham Junction and Elmer's End lines is at the outbound end of the Arena station. A Flexity is approaching from Beckenham Junction in this view from the outbound platform. The single track at right continues for 1 stop further over the same right-of-way to Elmer's End. Heading outbound from Arena to the Harrington Road stop and slightly beyond to Birkbeck Junction, a distance of just under a mile, the line follows a new alignment until it joins the right-of-way of the electrified Crystal Palace line to run to Beckenham Junction over what was once Southern Railway trackage. Here, the third rail electrified line was reduced to single track. It's on the other side of the fence, to make room for the light rail line. Tramlink's Avenue Road stop includes a passing track. A short-term turn service ends here with cars changing ends beyond the platforms. Avenue Road is no longer a stop on the Southern's route to Victoria and London Bridge, but they do share the preceding tram stop, Birkbeck. Tramlink's single track with its overhead curves away from the mainline platforms at Beckenham Junction toward its own separate platforms in this photo of a Southern 377 series EMU from the front of the train in which we were riding. These Bombardier-built Electrostar cars are powered from 750-volt DC third rail. Now over to Elmer's End, where a terminating Stadler tram is sharing the outbound platform with a Southeastern Railway third rail EMU that runs between Hayes and London Charing Cross. Number 2554 is unusual as it carries an I Love Croydon wrap. Now over to the western end of the system, which continues from Croydon to Wimbledon, where connection is made with the end of the Croydon Underground's District Line Southwest trains mainline to and from Clapham Junction and Waterloo Station, as well as Thameslink to central London and beyond. Formerly the Wimbledon and Croydon Railway, it became the Southern in 1923, and its single-track line was electrified with third rail in 1930. Always lightly traveled, it was closed in favor of Tramlink in 1997. Despite having frequencies that were limited by a single track, the line soon became the light rail network's heaviest route, probably because of all its connections. Most has since been double-tracked, allowing for the current 5-minute headway. Here's an Elmer's End-bound Variobahn car pausing at Mitcham, one stop beyond another connection with a line to London at Mitcham Junction, where the Southern runs to Clapham Junction and Victoria, as well as to London Bridge. One could make a good argument that this light rail line is an excellent feeder for passengers heading to and from London, in addition to its role as a local tram line. In that respect, it reminds me of the first modern tram line in Paris, the T1, which connects with many regional rail and metro lines, plus many streetcar lines in Moscow that intersect with their vast metro network. A final view just east of the Mitcham stop of a Wimbledon-bound Flexity. I should mention that Tramlink is operated by TfL, or Transport for London, which also runs London's underground and bus system and has responsibility for taxis and ferries as well, something like New York's MTA. Light rail fares fit into TfL's zone system, with the tram network having stops in zone 3, 4, and 5. But it also has a standalone flat fare and employs proof of payment, like MTA's select buses and most American light rail lines. Fares can also be paid by credit cards under a system to New York, similar to New York City's Omni, and it also has fare capping. Give me a moment for another drink.
Hmm. Wow.
Another rail system under TfL's control is the London Docklands Light Railway. This is an automated light metro system that was born in 1987, first with only 2 lines for the purpose of serving the redeveloped Docklands area, which has been turned into a financial district sporting impressive skyscrapers. It was immediately successful and has since grown tremendously into a large network. This is a view of the Canary Wharf station from West India Quay. A map of the network. The first lines ran from Bank and Stratford to Island Gardens. And here's Bank. Up here is Stratford. And basically the routes met at around Canary Wharf and West India Quay and continued down to Island Gardens. And you can see what has happened since, with the system growing from 7.5 miles of double track with 18 stations to 24 miles with 45 stops. And there are even more extensions on the drawing board. A southbound train has just weaved its way through a panoply of skyscrapers that constitute the Docklands skyline and is about to stop at the Cross Harbour station south of the Thames. A view of a lineup of rolling stock laid up at one end of Docklands' original storage and maintenance complex adjacent to the Poplar station. There is now a second. The roster is made up of 149 articulated rail cars from 4 series built from 1991 to 2007 by Bombardier. 54 new units from CAF are now on the property and under test, so they should be coming online soon. Trains now run with a maximum of 3 units, but the new ones will be 5-car fixed consists with open gangways. Interestingly, that by 1999, the first 2 series of cars were sold to Essen, Germany, where cabs were installed to allow them to be placed into service as manually controlled LRVs on the Ruhrstadtbahn. 2 Bombardier units from different series are stopped at the West India Quay station. It's difficult to see any difference in their body styles. Although the cars are not fitted out with driving cabs, children like me like to imagine themselves at the control, so the ends of some of the cars are outfitted with these decals. Manual controls in boxes below the windows are used in emergencies. Looking toward Canary Wharf from West India Quay. These 2 stations are very close together. The system's most complicated junction is behind this particular station. No, this is not the junction of the BMT's Broadway, Brooklyn, and 14th Street Canarsie lines in East New York. The spaghetti of trackage is seen from a walkway connecting the street with the Poplar station. Another view from the same place. 4 services pass through here, with each running on a 10-minute headway in base periods and more frequently in rush hours, so it is rare that all the tracks are empty at any time. Behind me, on the other end of the Poplar station, are the leads to the Poplar Depot and another flying junction where the Stratford line separates from the lines to Beckton and Woolwich Arsenal. Shades of the area between Broadway Junction and Atlantic Avenue, where the BMT Fulton Street Elevated once interfaced with the Canarsie line. We next rode toward Beckton. A view toward the DLR's outer terminal at Beckton shows a city-bound train approaching the Royal Victoria Station. The portal of the new Elizabeth line can be seen in the background, just before the Custom House station that serves both lines. The previous photo was taken from this overpass at the Royal Victoria Station. After a short walk, Karl Heinz and I transferred to another TfL operation, the IFS Cloud cable car. IFS is a Swedish tech company whose software is used to control the cable car's operation. The next 2 photos from the cable car on which we were riding high above the Thames River show a train on the DLR's Woolwich Arsenal line approaching its West Silvertown stop. The London cable car connects the 2 sides of the Thames between Royal Docks and North Greenwich as both a transit link and a tourist attraction. It was built by Doppelmayr and opened in 2012 as the Emirates Air Line, in time for the 2012 London Summer Olympics. By the way, the Swiss ski lift company has just been awarded the contract to replace the Newark Airport monorail. In 2022, the cable car's sponsorship was taken over by IFS. These views were also taken from the gondola that was carrying me and Karl Heinz. 36 handicapped accessible gondolas were built for the Dangleway, as many Londoners refer to it, but no more than 34 are allowed to operate at any given time. It is 5/8 of a mile long and reaches a height of 300 feet over the river. Even though it operates under the jurisdiction of TfL, the cost of a ride is aimed at tourists, and thus riding it is rather expensive, as IFS fares are not integrated with TfL's regular rates. It is advertised accurately as a unique view of London. A view from the ground at the North Greenwich end. London Underground Jubilee Line station is a short walk away. Like New York's subway system, London's Underground is the beating heart of its city's transportation network, totally indispensable. Dating back to 1863, it has gradually expanded to 250 miles of route and 272 stations, which does not include the highly touted Elizabeth Line, a new innovation for Britain's largest and most important city that is not officially part of the Underground. We'll take a look at the Elizabeth later. Like New York's subway, London's network of 11 lines come in two principal sizes: 4 large subsurface cut and cover routes and 7 deep level tube lines. Our system has a similar size difference, IRT 9-foot wide equipment versus BMT IND 10 feet. And there are similar examples of mixed dimension networks in Berlin and Madrid as well. And most of London lines have outdoor operation just like ours. Here is a view of Stamford Brook Station showing the Piccadilly Tube Line and the Subsurface District Line in a 4-track setting. It would take forever to go into all the delicious details of London's fascinating underground operation. And since Nick DeBarry, ERA's expert on the subject, has just retired and has indicated he may be leaving for London in just a few days, I'll leave that up to him for his next ERA program. This will just be a travelogue of 1.5 days on the system. But I do want to mention that the 4-track stretch of right-of-way shown here is relatively unusual for the underground, as most lines are only double track. Additionally, the smaller dimension tube lines have hardly any examples of trunk line operation with different services diverging and coming together like on New York subway. Although there are quite a few examples of this on the subsurface lines. Here is a closer up view of the Piccadilly line's tube stock, which was built by Metro Camel in 1973. Metro Camel is now part of Alstom. It is due for replacement by air-conditioned open gangway Siemens and Spiro units very soon, later this year if everything works out. Note the roadbed. London's underground employs both a third rail and a fourth rail, with the latter used as a ground instead of the more common running rail. Here the London line runs express and the subsurface one makes local stops. We rode a district line from here to Kew Gardens, a mere 3 stops. Don't know how we missed Forest Hills. I must have blinked. The larger S-class subsurface stock used here and now on all of the subsurface lines was built by Bombardier as part of their Movia series and was introduced to Londoners as far back as 2010. They have open gangways. The 2-story yellow brick station buildings here date from 1869 and are unusually fine examples of mid-Victorian railway architecture, with this one being one of the few still in use on the underground network. These tracks are shared with EMUs of what is now called the Mildmay line of the London Overground system, but formerly was known as the National Rail System's North London line. These MUs, like their predecessors dating from before the middle of the 20th century, were built for third rail operation, and there is no compatibility issue with their use on 4-rail equipped trackage. These cars, British Rail Class 378 units specifically, are actually dual voltage cars propelled by 750-volt DC third rail and the 25,000-volt AC overhead built for extensions when the overground network was being planned. The 57 5-car trains were introduced in 2008. They were built by Bombardier and are called Capital Star units. Can't be done here, of course, but I have this fantasy of New York, Westchester, and Boston trains continuing their runs to City Hall via the 2nd or 3rd Avenue L's, or to Grand Central and Wall Street via the Dyer Avenue, Lexington Avenue subway. Guess I hung around too often with the late Roger Arcara. Here is another example of overground-underground track sharing. At Willesden Junction on the Bakerloo and Euston-Watford Junction routes, the latter now renamed as the Lioness Line. In this case, the dual voltage train of the overground is an Aventra Class 710, a newer version from 2017 of the Class 378 Capital Stars, and is even in a new color scheme. The Bakerloo tube train looks rather shabby. Here in the shop area of the Williston Junction complex, we see an orange Aventra Class 710 next to a yellow Class 378 Capital Star. Fortunately, this Bakerloo train looks better. And why not? They were built as recently as 1972 by Metro Camel, and they're not due to be replaced until the late 2030s or early 2040s. So the last one could be 70 years old when it's retired. The Bakerloo train is running northbound to Harrow and Wheelstone. The pair of tracks in the background going off to the left connect the Bakerloo overground service between Euston Station and Watford Junction, and the overground line from Richmond and Kew Gardens that formerly was called the North London line. Same spot with a Capital Star train on the Mildmay line crossing over the joint Bakerloo Lioness line. This last group of images at Williston Junction were taken after our ride on the cable car, where we traveled from North Greenwich to Williston Junction via the Jubilee line and the Overground. But now let's get back to Kew Gardens, or should I say, Ealing Broadway. We traveled from Kew on the District line to Ealing Broadway, a terminal that sees both subsurface and tube trains, but not on the same tracks or even the same platforms. The Central line, which runs east-west, is the longest of all the underground lines at 46 miles. It employs cars that were built in 1992 by British Rail Engineering, later ABB, later Adtrans, still later Bombardier, and now Alstom, in the city of Derby in the Midlands. At North Acton, we reversed directions using an overpass to board another branch of the Central line to Hanger Lane, where we walked on the surface streets to the Piccadilly line's Park Royal station, a trip a little longer than we expected. Cockfosters is one of my favorite terminal names, so much more interesting than 241st Street, White Plains Road. But we were heading in the opposite direction to Rayners Lane, where the Piccadilly tube line joins the subsurface Metropolitan line to continue outbound over the same tracks for 6 stations to their joint Uxbridge terminal. Note the station building has a similar modern Bauhaus look to Park Royal, as both were built in the 1930s decade, replacing earlier ones near the same locations. In 1933, Piccadilly tube trains were substituted for the subsurface District line ones, and with both having wildly different floor heights, the platforms on this section had to be rebuilt at a compromised 840 millimeter height above the top of the rail. 2 platforms are usually 520 millimeters high, and subsurface ones are 900 millimeters. This means that passengers on Piccadilly line trains must step up when detraining, while Metropolitan passengers must step down. This is the Ruislip Manor station on the line to Uxbridge, with an inbound Piccadilly line stopping. It does look lower than the platform height, doesn't it? Here is a Metropolitan S-type train. Its exterior virtually the same as District line equipment, entering the same station while a Piccadilly line train is stopped. Let me stop for a second for a drink. We then, I guess, we then, I've got a frog in my throat. Kermit, get out of there. We then changed direction and rode a Metropolitan lane train back toward the city through Rayners Lane and on to Harrow on the Hill, the first station after the branch joins the Metropolitan's main line. Here, the right-of-way widens to 6 tracks, and you can see that. First are a pair of tracks used by National Rail DMU trains operated by Chiltern Railways to Marylebone Terminal. They're shown in black, followed by the Metropolitan's express and local tracks, which carry the line to and from Baker Street and beyond to the heart of the city along the Circle Line. Local trains run in the middle, Chicago style, with island platforms, as you can see on the right side of the map. While having express and local trains on separate tracks on trunk lines is a normal experience for New Yorkers, this is quite unusual in other countries and is only one of two such examples on London's Underground. Going outbound from Harrow on the Hill, the right-of-way narrows first to 4 tracks, all 4 electrified, and then off the map to 2 with the Metropolitan's electric trains and Chiltern's DMUs sharing the same metal until the current underground terminal at Amersham, just 35 miles from Baker Street, where the 3rd and 4th rails end. Chiltern's DMUs run further to Aylesbury, 15 miles more, which was the Metropolitan's terminal on my first visit to London in 1960, when the Met was still using electric and steam locomotives pulling coaches for its services from Baker Street to its most distant points. This photo is at Willesden Green, an express stop. The other 2 tracks are to my left. Here is a local stop, West Hampstead, with only an island platform. I should mention that express trains running on the separate express tracks reach the Underground's highest speeds of 62 miles per hour on some sections. At this point, further toward the city, the center tracks are being used by Jubilee line trains. So we have now gone 180 degrees from where we started at Stamford Brook, as here the tube trains are the locals, while the subsurface trains are expresses. These Jubilee trains were built by GEC Alstom Metro Camel and introduced in 1997. Similar cars are used on the Northern Line, which we did not ride on this trip. Back to the express stop at Willesden Green on this section of route. The Chiltern is behind the wall on the right. Now to conclude transport for London, the New Elizabeth Line. To simplify its description for those traction fans who are European travelers, it is London's answer to the Paris RER system. In other words, it's a modern underground express transit line cutting across the city from east to west with branches into suburban areas over former commuter or regional routes. Photography is difficult, in fact impossible on its underground section because of full height platform doors, so this view is at one of its suburban stations on the east, 7 King. One could say that photography is difficult at any station if you want to get only one train in a picture because the headways are very frequent and it seems there's always at least one train sitting on the platform. At peak periods, 24 trains per hour are operated in each direction over the underground trunk portion, which is about 10 miles long and contains 6 stations. Service is provided by a fleet of 630 Bombardier-built EMUs with open gangways in 9-car consists. Also called Aventra, like the Overground's Class 710s by Bombardier's successor Alstom, they are officially British Rail Class 345 and are capable of speeds up to 90 miles an hour. Originally named Crossrail, the Elizabeth Line became fully operational in May 2023 after Queen Elizabeth II opened it in person a week before a portion of it began carrying passengers in 2022. Service operates over 2 branches on each end. On the western side from Paddington, it provides local service for 40 miles to Reading over the Great Western Railway's main line, and also runs to Heathrow Airport via a branch turning south at Hayes and Harlington Station and duplicating a route also used by the expensive non-stop Heathrow Express. On its eastern end from Whitechapel, it runs over the Great Eastern Railway line to Sheffield, to Shenfield, and also over a new route to Abbey Wood, offering an express alternative to the mostly parallel Docklands Light Railway, making use of old rights-of-way of the North London Line and the North Kent Line, and a new tunnel under the Thames to connect them. The Elizabeth Line is extremely popular and successful, with its first year's patronage running about 220 million passengers, 10% above prediction. With Karl Heinz and I staying in Croydon, it was just a hop, skip, and a jump to Gatwick Airport, where my Delta flight to JFK left on Friday noon, August 2nd. It was a great trip, and I saw lots of new things in addition to revisiting many old haunts. This concludes my program. I hope you